Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the Psych coach, and today I'm going to be talking to you about psychological thinking errors. They're thought processes that we all engage with to a greater or lesser extent, but they aren't helpful ways of thinking and they aren't particularly truthful. So we need to be able to listen out for thinking errors and stop engaging with them and stop seeing them as statements of fact. Cognitive behavioural therapy is based on the fact that the way you think affects how you feel. So if you're able to be aware of the way you think, you'll be able to alter some of the emotions you feel as a result of them. So listen up for 5 psychological thinking errors that you probably do that you could do with stopping. Psychological thinking error number 1 is catastrophic thinking. Catastrophic thinking is a symptom of anxiety. It's where you start with a thought and then you suddenly run off into a whole abyss of terror. So you start thinking, imagine if this negative thing were to happen, and then imagine if this happened, then imagine if this happened, then imagine if this happened. And before you know it, you are dealing with an absolute catastrophe. An example of that might be if you haven't done particularly well at work and you think, what if my boss thinks badly of me? And then what if I lost my job? And then what if I lost my house? And then what if my partner left me? And before you know it, you're dealing with a complete catastrophe. The same way that, I don't know, maybe you're waiting for your partner to come in from work and they're late. And you think, imagine if they've had a crash, and imagine if I've not been told about it, and then imagine if I'm going to be without a partner for the rest of my life. And then, and that thought process can happen within minutes. So catastrophic thinking is a thinking error. Most people engage with it, but it shouldn't be taken too seriously. And if you can start seeing that for what it is, a thinking error, it will reduce some of the intense emotions that typically come with it. Thinking error number 2 is mind reading. Mind reading is where we convince ourselves we know what people are thinking about us. And very rarely do people mind read in a positive way. In fact, I've never come across it. I've never heard someone say, they think I'm amazing, it's just they're not telling me. Typically, people will think they think I'm an idiot, they think I don't know what I'm talking about, they think I'm a fraud, they don't like me, but they're not telling me. That is mind reading. We simply cannot mind read. Even the best psychologists in the world can't mind read. If that were the case, we wouldn't have a jury system because we would just get really good psychologists to mind read people who are on trial. No matter how much body language books you read, no matter how many videos you watch on how to mind read, you are never going to be able to accurately and totally predict what people think about you or other things. So try and disengage with it as a thought process because it is a recognised psychological thinking error. Psychological thinking error number 3 is fortune telling. Fortune telling is where you predict the future. Most people who fortune tell might have a leaning towards anxiety, and if you feel anxious, it is unlikely you will fortune tell in a positive way. Most people will fortune tell in a negative way. Things are going to be really bad. I know if I say this, this is going to happen. I know that when I go to this event, this will occur, and this person will say this to me. It's all fortune telling. And of course, we can't predict the future. We don't know how situations are going to turn out. But when you engage in fortune telling, you can build yourself up into a state of anxiety more often than not for a situation that isn't actually going to occur. Now, I'm not saying totally negate experience because experience, of course, helps influence how we think situations are going to turn out. If you've been to a particular event 5 times and it's you've had a particular experience of it for 5 times, chances are you may have a similar experience. But there is also a chance it won't be the same. So even if experience dictates that you know how something's going to turn out, you still need to be open to the fact it may not turn out like that. If you don't have any experience of how the situation is, chances are you're not going to accurately be able to predict it anyway. So again, try to disengage in fortune telling. Psychological thinking error number 4 is dichotomous thinking. Dichotomous thinking is all or nothing thinking. A lot of the time, people who are a perfectionist will typically think in all or nothing terms. The idea is that someone thinks if something is anything other than absolutely perfect, the only other thing it can be is terrible. There's nothing in between. It's perfect or it's terrible. It's good or it's bad. That's simply not true. The reality is most things are on a sliding scale. You can have something that's excellent, very good, good, average, below average, poor, terrible. Things are on a sliding scale. If you, for example, have failed at something and you tell yourself, I'm a total failure, it was just awful. It's probably not true. It's highly unlikely you are a total failure. You may have made a mistake, you may have done something wrong, but it doesn't mean that you are a total failure. So try not to think in totally binary terms. If something hasn't gone well, it doesn't mean it was totally useless. It probably means, though, it was slightly below your ideal standard. But again, it doesn't mean it's a total failure. So be very aware of dichotomous thinking, all or nothing thinking. Something's either really successful or it's totally awful. It's really good or it's a waste of time. Don't be dichotomous. Psychological thinking error number 5 is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is where we tell ourselves, because we feel a certain way, it must be true. For example, because I feel like a really bad person, it must be true. It must mean that I'm really bad. Because I feel like a total loser, it must mean that I'm a total loser. Because I feel like a failure, it must mean that I am. It's simply not true. Just because we feel a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Waking up feeling as if something bad is going to happen is another kind of thinking error. Emotional reasoning is at play there, where we're sort of relying on feelings that aren't necessarily based on any kind of fact. So be careful when you engage in emotional reasoning, because it can be really compelling, as can all of the thinking errors, to think that they're truthful, but they're not. If you catch yourself emotional reasoning, recognise that just because you're feeling a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And I said at the start, all 5 of these thinking errors are thought processes that most of us will engage with at various points in our lives to a greater or lesser extent. But the more you're aware of them and the more you can pick yourself up on having them, the less compelling they will be for you and the less you will buy into them, and the subsequent less anxiety or negative emotions you will have as a result of that. So look out for those 5 thinking errors. If you've enjoyed learning about today's thinking errors, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will give you plenty more psychological input on how you can use psychology in your day-to-day life.